Today on Stronger Than Reason, we talk about a bunch of songs by a bunch of bands. Welcome to our second mixtape. Welcome to Stronger Than Reason. So here we are at episode 90. To be honest, I never imagined I'd hit this many episodes, let alone still be doing this after 2+ years. I think this podcast has been a successful experiment so far, and a lot of that comes down to you, the listeners, and the feedback I've gotten through your comments and emails. So long story short, you motivated me to keep it up, and you're why we're still here, still having this long ongoing discussion. So thank you for hanging in there. Maybe with luck, at our current merry pace, we'll hit episode 100 before too long. I'll have to think up something special for that one. But in the meantime, 90 is a respectable milestone, and as a big round number is deserving of its own special topic. So much like we did with episode 80, this one is another mixtape, meaning that instead of dipping into a particular band or album or topic, we're going to spread it around. We're picking a few semi-random bands and songs and are hitting each of them relatively quickly. It's a chance for us to go wide and shallow instead of narrow and deep, to cover a lot of territory at once. And as before, I'll do my best to provide a YouTube playlist of the songs we talk about. And the other thing I'm going to try to do at these episodes is to avoid artists I normally talk about. The whole idea here is to capture stuff that I only know casually, that I might not be able to speak about sensibly for a full 30, 40 minutes, but that I still like in some way and have some experience with. So the bar is lower, which will encourage me to stretch a bit. Last time the playlist was truly random, and it was pretty much a proof of concept, just to see if I could build an episode in that way. And this time there is more of a theme. This set is going to be a bit heavier and darker, like my heart. So let's dive in, shall we? First up is a little ditty called Love Will Save You from New York experimental rock pioneers Swans. Now, I am not a Swans expert, but I know enough to know that they are heavyweights of alternative rock and that they've had multiple connections into other genres and bands and artistic activities that were relevant to my interests. To wit, Bill Rieflin was a frequent contributor, and that's really all I needed to know. But also Henry Rollins' 21361 published a book by the lead Swan, Mr. Michael Gira. I also know that they chose their name because actual swans are not only beautiful, but also dangerous, surprisingly enough. So they're kind of a metaphor for this sort of music. I first heard of Swans in 1991 or so on the Ceremony mailing list, which, if you recall, was a listserv for Joy Division and New Order. In '88, Swans had released some covers of Joy Division's Love Will Tear Us Apart. I say some covers because there were various versions. The red version features Gira on lead vocals, and the black version features his colleague Jarboe. From the band's reputation, I expected these covers to be noisy and dark, but they were quite the opposite, with just acoustic guitars, no drums, and just beautiful vocals and harmonies. It was my first indication that Swans were more than a one-trick pony. I wouldn't really dig into Swans much at all after that. They kind of fell off my radar for many years, but then in 2014, I somehow came across them again. And I wish I could remember how that happened exactly. I think it involved me hearing Love Will Save You somehow and getting totally sucked into it. If I had to guess, I'd say I heard about it on Slicing Up Eyeballs, which at the time was not only a radio show, but an active blog that distributed all the latest alternative and industrial music news. Nowadays, Slicing Up Eyeballs is still great, and you can still get the free cool stickers, but it's mostly just a radio show. I think the founder, Matt Sebastian, decided a few years ago to dial back his workload and is now focusing on the show, which is on Sirius FM every week. However, I don't recall how I heard it, but it utterly blew me away. Again, I expected something grating and harsh from Swans, not one of the most beautiful and moving songs I've ever heard. The best word that sums up Love Will Save You is epic. This is an epic song. It sounds absolutely huge. It starts off innocently enough with a guitar arpeggio that sounds like House of the Rising Sun, but then it quickly grows into a monster. These massive drums come in, played by the great Anton Fier, and bring this wild swing to it all. And the song just really builds and builds from there with tons of tension and huge sounds. And Gira is singing about all the different ways that love will save you, reciting a catalog of horrible cataclysms and disasters, finally saying inexplicably that love will never save him. And it just hit me like a punchline. And that to me just painted such a perfect picture. Gira has a certain humor amidst the darkness, and it just really was a combination that rang my bell. I wanted to hear more, and there was plenty more. The song was a good 6 minutes long, and then something crazy happened after the third verse. It just shifted gears entirely and went into this huge, enormous orchestral chorus. It was just very unexpected and lovely. And it had no words, just Jarboe vocalizing along to the pianos and keys, this repeating motif that modulated a bit. And it damn near brought tears to my eyes. It was like being in this dark tunnel and then driving out into the bright sunshine. And how brilliant is it that an artist could construct a song in such a way that I'd laugh during the dark bits and cry during the light bits? It's just completely backwards, but I'll tell you, I really had a physical reaction to hearing that song for the first time, and I still do. It's one of the very few songs that can push all my emotional buttons. I just love everything about it. The instrumentation, the arrangement, the message, the delivery, the beauty, the humor, the darkness. Gira delivers one more verse, and then the song goes into this extended outro on the chorus, just completely instrumental. It is a stunning piece of work, and it just left me utterly standing in my tracks like I'd been hit by a train. I went out and I picked up the album. This is 1991's White Light from the Mouth of Infinity, which proved to have a lot of other amazing tracks on it. Much like Love Will Save You, the songs here are all beautiful and powerful and immaculately produced, but they are not easy to categorize. They are not simply rock and roll. They are not simply industrial and not simply whatever label you want to give. They're just amazing music made by an amazing artist, and always with a touch of the transgressive. So Swans have had a long career, and this was their 7th full-length album. Previously, they were far more abrasive. They were early examples of noise and sludge rock. White Light was part of a greater shift towards accessibility that had started with the prior album, that was 1989's The Burning World, which was their first stint on a major label. White Light, on the other hand, came out on Gira's own Young God label, which Swans would continue to release on right up to the present day. So clearly, Swans is a rabbit hole, pun intended, that one could go far, far down. And to date, they've released 15 albums, with the 16th due to come out on May 30th of this year. Over the years, they've changed, adapted, explored, disbanded, regrouped, and reimagined their music, constantly searching and finding. So Swans is one of those rarest of things in the music industry, a project that is still artistically vital and relevant after 40 years. To me, Love Will Save You was the gateway to their world, one that I didn't walk through so much as get pulled through because it was just so compelling. Check it out if you haven't heard it. Okay, so moving right along to another big song, another big sound. This one coming from the early 90s rock band Sugar, which you might recall was formed by Bob Mould, formerly of punk stalwarts Husker Du. Following that band's breakup, Bob had had some success in 1990 with his solo album Black Sheets of Rain, which I recall seeing a lot of on MTV's 120 Minutes. But then in 1992, amidst the grunge and rockification of all Western music, he formed a second band called Sugar that continued his experimentation with a much heavier guitar sound. Their first album, Copper Blue, came out in 1992 and was something of a commercial success. I doubt you're shocked to hear that I didn't listen to it right away. Power pop wasn't really my thing in 92, but I would come to know the album pretty well many years later. In 2005 or so, I would join a cover band, and one of the guys was a Sugar fan, and we ended up playing 2 songs from this album, Hopeless, which is a banger, and another song that really, really blew me away. It's called The Act We Act. The band was kind of funny because the other guys were all 5 or 10 years older than I was, and even though we were all well into the MP3 and iPod era by 2005, and even though all of them worked in information technology, they were a bunch of Luddites and would only exchange music on cassette. So my first taste of sugar, so to speak, was on this crappy Radio Shack cassette that one of the guys had handed to me. But I knew I would like to play The Act We Act right away. I was playing drums at the time, and this song just had a lot of cool tom work. The verses were positively tribal, and the choruses just rocked. It was heavy and dark with plenty of palm-muted, chunky rhythm guitar, which I love, and Bob's words are really great too, just speaking to things like loneliness and fitting in, this elemental stuff that everyone can relate to. So it was a favorite of mine to play for years, and eventually in that band I moved to guitar, and we brought in another guy to play drums, and I had played on an acoustic kit, but he played on an electronic kit, and I think that's when I first developed a bad attitude about electronic kits for live performance, because as convenient as that thing was for him to lug around, and as easy as it was on everyone else's ears, I think it just sounded like crap. His tiny amp just couldn't compete with the huge guitar and bass amps. Eventually, I met my current bandmate and just noped out of that whole other band, and after a few years, I guess I was just more interested in exploring new and original music, writing my own stuff, than just playing rock covers. And I don't know what happened to those guys. Maybe they're still out there playing together, exchanging cassettes, but they did hit me to Sugar and Copper Blue. It's a great example of that peculiar early 90s zeitgeist, and I still love to listen to The Act We Act in particular. To this day, I'll still sit at the old drum kit and pound it out. It still sounds rad. Bob would disband Sugar in 1995, but he'd revisit it in 2012 when he'd tour and play the album in its entirety. So it is still a fan favorite. All right, next up, an odd one. I don't think I ever even mentioned this band before on this show after 90 episodes, and I'm certainly not familiar with the whole history and output of this band, so my comments will be pretty focused. The band is Everything But the Girl, which is, I admit, an unusual name, one that they nicked from a furniture store in their hometown of Kingston upon Hull in England. So they were a duo consisting of singer Tracy Thorn and multi-instrumentalist Ben Watt. So for years, my only experience of this band was coming across them in the record bins filed under E, probably when I was searching for electronic or excessive force. So I hadn't really heard them at all, but I knew they existed. Then in 2000, I was lounging poolside in Las Vegas, as you do, and I heard this amazing dance song come on the PA, one with this cheesy yet compelling chorus that went, "I miss you like the deserts miss the rain." I looked it up later on the web because this was before smartphones, and I discovered that it was a song called Missing by Everything But the Girl. And that didn't surprise me too much because I had figured they were an alternative band just from their album artwork, and it made sense to me that they were maybe alternative dance. And I didn't run out to buy their stuff right away, but then they really were on my radar. So fast forward now to 2005 or so. I'm going through a heavy, massive attack phase, as I described in episode 15, the one about their magnum opus, Mezzanine. And I gradually picked up their other albums, including their second one, Protection, which, by the way, I still have to talk about. And I'm surprised, again, to find that Tracy Thorn is a guest vocalist on 2 tracks on Protection, including the title track, which is badass. So at this point I figure, all right, I gotta check this band out. So I pick up the album that featured Missing, which was 1994's Amplified Heart. But I'm shocked to find it's not dance music at all, but sensitive emo acoustic music. I mean, don't get me wrong, it was really well done and all, but it just wasn't what I expected. So cue more hunting around on the internet to figure out what's going on. Do I even have the right band? It turns out the version I had heard in Vegas was sort of a random thing they did. See, the band decided to give the song to American producer Todd to remix as a house track, and that was the version that blew up the charts. Specifically, it hit number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1996. So that's why it was playing over a PA system at a Las Vegas pool. Now, I haven't dug very deep into their regular stuff, but I do love that Todd Terry mix of Missing. It is a classic. The beats are simple, really hard-hitting, so very 90s. But Tracy's vocals are also spot on, just a great counterpoint. And talking about this does remind me that I should dig more into that band, especially their later stuff, because I understand that much like Bjork, their success having their stuff adapted into club music then influenced them into that direction. So I understand they took a hiatus for much of the first part of the 21st century, but recently reunited. And I say reunited, but they're actually a happily married couple. 2023's Fuse was their first new album in 20 plus years, and it was very favorably received by fans and critics. So, hey, that might be a good jumping off point. So next up, we're moving back to those good old days of taping 120 minutes every weekend and fast forwarding through all the crap, hunting for anything industrial. One video that caught my eye was from a band with a familiar name and pedigree, yet one that I haven't talked about at all yet. It was maybe the canonical industrial rock band of the early 90s, Frontline Assembly, which was led by one Bill Lieb, who was an alumnus of Skinny Puppy. He'd leave that band to form FLA, and he's continued it to the present day, working with a variety of collaborators over the last 3 decades. The song in question immediately grabbed my ear. I loved the beat. I loved everything about it. It was heavy and abrasive with a ton of energy, yet was a catchy pop song. It had an intro, verses, a bridge, and a chorus. And it made sense as a song, but it was still very kick-ass. The song was called Iceolate, spelled Iceolate, and it was evidently from their 4th album, 1990's Caustic Grip, which I duly went out and purchased on cassette. I still have the cassette, but I didn't bother crawling through the archives to find it for you all. Too many spiders and snakes back there, sorry. But I gotta say, as much as I loved Iceolate, I didn't really care for much of the rest of Caustic Grip. I found it all kind of samey, kind of industrial by the numbers. To me, it was just formulaic. You had your beats, your arpeggiated synths with very few pads, almost no guitars, distorted and affected out vocals, and just random samples sprinkled in there. So a few years later, Trent Reznor would start a beef with Bill Lieb by criticizing that very formula in an interview in Spin magazine, in which he specifically called out FLA. And to me, that validated my own opinion of Caustic Grip. I never picked up any more of FLA's stuff, but I do still like to rock Iceolate now and then. I think it's just a great track. You know, I'm sure there are more great FLA tracks that I'm missing out on, so please give me your recommendations, because I don't want to miss out. I really wouldn't have much more truck with FLA ever again, although I did pick up a best of from one of Bill's many side projects, Delirium, which was strangely more commercially and critically successful than FLA ever was. The idea of Delirium was to make a bunch of trance tracks and get a bunch of guests to sing on them. They had a massive hit with the song Silence, which was fronted by Sarah McLachlan, who's someone else I'll eventually talk about, and I'll probably get around to talking about Delirium as well, for that matter. And of course, I know that Bill hooked up with Skinny Puppy again in recent years, going on tour with them, and then reconvening Cyberactive, which was his side project with Kevin Key. I think they just came out with another album since Puppy disbanded. Obviously, Bill Lieb is a creative guy with a lot of projects. FLA and all its various offshoots are yet another rabbit hole that one could spend a lot of time digging into. But for now, we are going to move on. Duty calls, and we still have to finish out Side A. Next up is a band I first heard about in 2009 when a buddy of mine sent me one of their early hits, which was called At the River. It was some wonderfully groovy sample-delica with some badass trombone. That's exactly how my friend described it. And, who doesn't love some badass trombone? No one doesn't love it. That's who. Everyone loves it. But I'd get really into them the following year in 2010. A Space Odyssey. No. 2010 was the year that this band released a pair of killer albums. And man, I love some albums that go together, that are like evil twins, say, or companion pieces. I like it when artists think bigger than just one album, when they dream big, and that's what happened here, I think. And as you may have guessed, the band is England's own Groove Armada, and the albums in question were called Black Light and White Light. I did listen to these a lot when they came out, and so did my neighbors. Many great memories of just tooling around the neighborhood in the car, blasting this with the windows down. Plus, my kids were little at the time, and they took a shine to this music, and to one song in particular. And you know how a little kid will just latch onto a song and want to hear it over and over? That's exactly what happened here. The song was the last one on Black Light, which was the proper album of the two. White Light was more of a reworking or reimagining that came out of the band preparing tracks for the summer festival season, so it's more or less a remix album. Now, I still have iTunes on my computer because I am a techno dinosaur, and because I still insist on keeping my entire music collection on my phone. No Spotify or other subscription services for me. So one nice thing about that is that iTunes still tracks how many plays each song has. So when I sort by number of plays, the songs my kids latched onto all those years ago still rise to the top. In fact, this tune is number 3 on their list. Number 2 was, and I'm so proud of this, I Want You Back by the Jackson 5, a song that has maybe the funkiest drums in the world, so God bless whoever played those drums on that recording. And their number 1 was, any guesses? Any guesses at all? It was Around the World / Harder, Better, Faster, Stronger from Daft Punk's Alive 97. I remember driving one day and playing that song for them for the first time, and when the big drop hit and you hear the crowd go nuts, we went nuts too. And after that, it was required listening on every single car trip, needless to say. Anyway, History by Groove Armada is 3rd on that list. Hey, that's an idea. Maybe someday I'll do a whole mixtape episode based on the songs we used to listen to in the car, because that would be so much good stuff, like Midnight Oil, Hot Chip, Men at Work, The Cure, Steve Mason, Blondie, The Cars, AC/DC. So, yeah, I'm going to jot that down. That's a good idea. Okay, so back to History. It's just this infectious bit of synth pop with a big fat sequenced bass line, lots of keyboard hooks, and vocals by this guy named Will Young, who evidently won one of those TV pop idol contests. None of which I watch. I don't watch TV. The thing I always loved about his vocals on this track, though, is that they're almost completely unintelligible. The only words that I can make out are in the chorus when he says, "It's history repeating, keeps turning me around." So I don't have a lot to say about this track other than it's just a delightful bit of fluff, a chaser on this album, Black Light, that is otherwise very multifaceted, complex, and varied. There are just a bunch of great tracks on it, and I could have picked any of them for this mixtape, but I'm going with History because of all the happy memories driving around and rocking it with the kids. Even then, they had great taste in music. And that's it for side A, gang. We're halfway there now, so let's flip the tape, or for those lucky sods with auto reverse, just give it a few seconds to kick in. Okay, we're there now. Okay, side B starts with an old favorite, one that brings back a lot of good memories. So let me paint a picture. It's May 2010, and a friend has just forwarded me some really strange YouTube videos. The titles are all gibberish, just numbers and letters that make no sense. The videos are these arty things of a blonde lady all done up in strange costumes, singing and interacting with these bizarre props on these meticulously crafted sets. The whole thing smacked of a viral marketing campaign for something. The channel was called Iamamiwhoami, and after several of these quirky videos, it gradually became clear that this was indeed a marketing campaign of sorts, or at least a new way of promoting music in the post-torrent age. So the focus then shifted toward identifying the blonde woman who appeared in all these videos, the main singer. And you know what? The mystery lasted for quite a while, longer than you would think these days. And even once we all knew who it wasn't really confirmed for a year or two more. So it turns out, and this wasn't much of a surprise, that the singer was Swedish. Yes, Iamamiwhoami is yet another thing from Sweden that is awesome, along with Ghost, Viagra Boys, Mjorkborg, and ABBA. The singer is the one and only Jonah Lee, who had a solo career of her own, making singer-songwritery pop rock, and who fell in with a bunch of visual artists and decided to try something new, hence this project, which, while not being pop rock per se, eventually produced some pop-like tunes that together formed an audio-visual album of sorts called Bounty. Each track had a video, usually with some extensive production around it, and the one that really caught my ears was called O. Just O. It's really a great synth-pop song, and for an artsy-fartsy, high-concept kind of experimental band, it was a real head-nodder. All big, beautiful synth arpeggios and sweeps, accentuated by Jonah's breathless vocals. You know, shades of Tony Halliday, to be sure, but maybe without Tony's ever-present threat of lodging a Doc Martin in your ass. Jonah has a idiosyncratic vocal style, almost mumbling, but it's totally effective here and suits the music beautifully. The video is just something else. All their videos are something else, and it really encapsulates just the sheer weirdness of Iamamiwhoami. And when you watch it, imagine it's 15 years ago, pre-Twitter, and you're just trying to figure out what's going on here. I gotta admit, this tune O is still in my regular rotation, such as it is. I think it's a great driving tune. And wow, her vocal melodies will just lodge themselves in your brain, because it's a real earworm. Even if I can't always understand what she's saying, that seems to be a recurring theme here, doesn't it? You know, for what it's worth, I did go to an audiologist a couple years ago. I was having problems with tinnitus. He gave me a hearing test, you know, where the sound bounces all around and you have to press a button when you hear it and it gets fainter and fainter. Turns out I have the ears of a 20-year-old despite the occasional ringing. Somehow the ringing doesn't actually affect my hearing, so I got that going for me, which is nice. Anyway, I'm pretty sure I can't understand these vocalists because they all mumble a lot. It's not me, it's them. So anyway, what happened to Iamamiwhoami after their viral success? Well, Jonah Lee came clean about her involvement and spent the next years switching between that project and her solo project. Iamamiwhoami would play concerts, the first of which was entirely on YouTube. It was less of a concert and more of a long-form video that incorporated all the tunes. They were ostensibly sung live, but there was a twist, a really weird twist. The band invited one fan to be a part of the filming, and throughout the set, which occurred in a forest, because, of course, Jonah led this guy from one location to another, performing songs as she went. And finally, they did some sort of crazy trick where they put the guy in a cardboard box and lit it on fire. I think Penn and Teller would approve. Anyway, It was a strange concert, but I remember sitting there watching the whole thing, so it must have been pretty entertaining. And they would certainly go on to release more music, always with new and inventive videos, and they're still out there doing their thing as I speak. So check out O by Iamamiwhoami. It's still my favorite tune of theirs. All right, next, I have to give props to my local grocery store, not because they're sponsoring this podcast. Lord knows this podcast has no sponsors. Not because everyone there is friendly and nice, which they are. Not because it's brightly lit and almost never runs out of stuff. And certainly not because they put up with my wife and I doing the self-checkout in Spanish every week and insisting that we did it intentionally when some well-intentioned person comes over to help us put it back to English. This is a thing that happens like clockwork for some reason. No, I want to give my local grocery store props because they invariably play awesome 80s music every week while we're there. I don't know if this is something they do all the time or just the particular time of the week that we go, but man, I am always hearing these great tunes that I'd all but forgotten about, and I wind up humming them all week. And it's not just your ordinary 80s crap either. You know, your Huey Lewis and Phil Collins and Air Supply, the stuff we couldn't get away from back then. It's some bitchin' stuff like the Motels and Prince and Bronski Beat and Johnny Hates Jazz. I don't know, maybe now at 50-something, I'm finally in the average target demographic. I don't know. I don't get it. I will say, though, that the other grocery store in town, the one that's dark, crowded, and that never has what I want, that one ain't playing cool 80s tunes, and that's why I don't go there. So I was at the store the other week, and this tune came on that I probably hadn't heard in 30 years. I mean, it probably does play in public places all the time, but somehow when I'm in the store, I'm focused on the music, and it really blew me away. Like, man, I remember this song. This is great. And, you know, as you do, I tried to place it. It had men and women trading off the vocals and this huge, corny sing-along chorus, and I just came up empty. I just didn't have a clue. So naturally, I looked it up on my phone and was surprised to find that it was the Human League, that they had another hit song besides Don't You Want Me. The song in question was called Keep Feeling Fascination. And just saying that title, I am sure that some of you now have that song rolling through your heads. It's just super catchy. And I'm not a huge Human League fan, but I do enjoy their stuff. And I recall them fondly when I saw their interviews in the great documentary Synth Britannia, which I highly recommend watching if you're interested in that sort of thing. And, you know, for sure, they were a big part of the early 80s synth pop movement. Their 1981 album Dare was a massive global hit. Keep Feeling Fascination, though, was not on a studio album. It came out on the 1983 Fascination EP. Now, I know I said this mixtape would be harder and darker, and, you know, for the most part it is. This song is the exception. It's the little breath of air between the main courses. If you haven't heard this tune in a while, check it out. The video is pretty good too. You know, they painted an entire city block orange for it, so the least we can do is check it out, right? You know, these days they'd make a video like that with special effects and chroma key it in. Not so in 83. They had to paint the whole block orange. All right. I'm shifting gears here a bit for the next one because this one is personal. I did mention this album briefly in the April Fool's episode. I said it was one of my favorites, and that was not a joke. It really is. I first heard of this project in 2008 through a string of extremely fortunate coincidences. See, this was shortly after I had gotten into home recording. I'd written and recorded an album and found myself shamelessly plugging it online. One person replied about it, saying he dug what I was doing and had similar musical tastes, and strangely enough, he had just recorded an album too. And did I want to hear it? I said, of course, and he sent me a link, and I downloaded the thing, and in short, I was just blown away. My so-called album was this terribly amateur thing. I not only find it hard to listen to these days, but the honest truth is that I don't listen to it at all. I really don't think anyone should. It just wasn't very good. This guy's album, on the other hand, was just amazing. The sound was squarely the kind of stuff I love to listen to. The foundation was these slow grooves with all these trippy guitar hooks on top and subdued vocals and plenty of samples that just fit perfectly and just tons of effects on the whole thing. It's kind of trip-hop meets shoegaze at 3/4 speed. Just amazing stuff. And what I didn't realize at first is that this guy had plenty of professional training and experience. He made his living as a professional musician for some years and was just a damn talented musician and producer. So there was really no basis for comparison between our projects. I was just some schmuck with a laptop, a copy of Fruity Loops, and a fresh account at CD Baby. My album was like lunch with cold cuts and some handfuls of Fritos, but his album was like a dish in a fine restaurant where the chef selects ingredients for their flavors and textures and everything cooks down and blends together into something amazing. It was just a whole different level of sophistication and artistry. So that initial interaction started a correspondence over email, and we very quickly learned that, strangely enough, we were living just a mile apart. So needless to say, we became collaborators and had a bunch of musical adventures, and we are still best friends to this day. So without further ado, here's that album again. It's called Lasers Shoot From Our Fangs. And despite that name being most excellent for search engine optimization, you won't easily find this album. It's not on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Music. I'm pretty sure you would have to track down a physical copy, and good luck with that because it's out of print. There is one song on here that's always been my favorite of the bunch. It's called Getaway Cars, and it is something special. This whole song hangs on this killer bass line, and it's got this great draggy beat that was made by sampling all sorts of hand percussion and kids' musical toys, and it has these deep synth washes and these wordless harmonies on the chorus and lyrics that are describing, I really don't know what, but I was told later that it had something to do with a bank robbery gone wrong. But the words are delivered in such a way that it's evocative but not obvious. It's just a really cool song. I love the blend of melodies and the chord progression and the overall vibe. Now, I have to come clean here. This song, Getaway Cars, has a long history with the two of us. You might know that we have a recording project, and if you're interested, I'm sure you can explore a bit, click around and find it. The thing is that we've revisited a lot of the songs on this Lasers album, reimagining them, re-recording them, and we did a new version of Getaway Cars, and we've played this song live a bunch of times too, in front of actual people, which was a real kick for me, or something I really enjoyed. But I do have a soft spot for this original version. When I first listened to this album, I learned I had a lot to learn about songwriting, recording, and production. And more importantly, I found Getaway Cars and this whole album to just be a huge inspiration. So my buddy and I working together, we didn't just repeat the formula that was on this album. We've written 7 albums so far and counting, over 80 songs. There's quite a bit of experimentation and exploration going on there. A lot of styles. Many of those songs are things that I know I never would have written myself or could have written myself. So that's why I have a soft spot for this record, despite the fact that we more or less digested it entirely and made it part of this much bigger other thing. But listening to this record takes me back to that moment of inspiration every time. And I do still listen to it. It's still in rotation nearly 20 years later. In fact, it's such a good album that I would be enjoying it now, even if I had never met the guy who created it. It's just a damn good record on its own. Still one of my favorites. So cheers, T-Bone. You made one for the ages. My hat's off to you. Unfortunately, I won't be able to post this original version of Getaway Cars to the playlist since it's not available on YouTube. But if you dig around a bit, With a little bit of creativity, I'm sure you can find our remake on the interwebs. Trust me on that. Why am I just not giving it to you? Well, the reason is because I'm not here to pimp my own stuff. We've been over this many times. That's not what this podcast is about. So I'm not going to make it too convenient for you, but it's there if you want to find it. Okay, moving on to a tune I first heard on August 20th, 2017 at 8:57 p.m. Where were you at that moment? I'll tell you where I was. I was in a McDonald's bathroom, because that's where I make all my important discoveries. At that moment, I Shazammed the song that was playing on the PA, because I could have sworn it was some great aggressive synth rock gem from 1990. It had this driving beat and these great keyboard licks. Now, I know I have great big holes in my musical education, even with music of my own era. For instance, I haven't talked much on here about the Smiths or the Cure. And, that's mostly due to my own ignorance, my own blinders, and my tendency to just get into certain ruts. So I figured this was another such example, some, great band that I stupidly passed over way back in the day. And I sat in that damp bathroom in McDonald's waiting for Shazam to unlock this secret for me. And lo and behold, it wasn't a 90s band. It was the English rock band Muse and their song Uprising, a theatrical bit of heavy synth rock if there ever was one. I dug it right away, and I quickly sent off for their album, 2009's The Resistance. And I had another strange run-in with this song in 2019, when I once again happened to be in Vegas. I swear it was a work trip. It was definitely a work trip. It was a big convention, and the production values there were just through the roof. And one night they held this dinner in this enormous room. The idea was to have all these stations where you could go get food, and then you walk around and you talk to vendors about their products. The food was ridiculously amazing. I remember this pasta dish and, I don't know, a guy carving roast beef. It was just your typical crazy Vegas all-you-can-eat thing. And then off to the side were these three ladies playing violins and a string bass, and there were hundreds of people in this enormous room. No one was even paying any attention to them. So I like music. I love live music. So I went over and watched for a bit, and wouldn't you know it, they started playing Uprising by Muse. And they must have been playing all these other popular hits that I was just too thick to recognize. So that was kind of fun, running into this song again in that place. Finally, my one kid, the one who helped us out with the Weezer episode, is a huge Muse fan and has walked me through some of his favorite tracks of theirs, like one called Hysteria, which he learned to play on the piano. And he challenged me to learn the bass part, and I did at least the first bit of the bass part, although their bassist does a lot of crazy stuff later in the song. It gets pretty nuts. But Muse has been simmering in my consciousness for a while now, and I can definitely appreciate them for their rock, as well as for the fact that they're carrying the torch for post-punk well into the 21st century. In a slightly different world where I'd heard about them sooner, I'm sure I'd no doubt be a massive fan, and as it is, they caught me during middle age when I find it very difficult to give new music the attention I would have to give it to really make it part of my DNA. But Muse, a great band, and certainly a great live show, so props to them. I imagine everyone has heard Uprising by now, but if not, check it out. It's a slice of vintage 90s synth rock that was made in 2009. Okay, here we are at the end. One for the road. I'm going with another recommendation from my kid, only because this is a song he learned to play on the piano in full, and it's really his performance I'm thinking about here, which I actually prefer to the original. But since he hasn't yet recorded his performance for me, despite promising to do that, I can only link you to the original. This is a tune by, this little-known band that named themselves after a Talking Heads song of all things. They're called Radiohead. I know they're somewhat successful, but Radiohead is not a band I generally have listened to. But Listen to this song. I did over and over last summer as my kid learned to play it, and it really grew on me. And it's no surprise that this song is called No Surprises, and it really is a 90s song this time, having first appeared on their acclaimed 1997 album OK Computer. So when my kid was practicing, he was upstairs and I was actually listening to it through the floor, just the chords and the melody. That was it. None of the band's instrumentation or production, no vocals, just piano. And still, that damn song moved me. It's an emotional song with highs and lows, the way it comes together and builds up and slaps you around a little. It's just very pretty and sad at the same time. And I often talk on here about a song's bones, meaning not any particular recording or arrangement, but sort of the platonic ideal of the song itself. Those things that make that song that song. And this song, No Surprises, is great. It has great bones. You could interpret it any number of ways on any number of instruments, and it's going to be moving. And even though I'm not the world's biggest Radiohead fan, my hat's off to them for their ability to write a song of that magnitude. Because in terms of pure songwriting, this one is worthy of being on a Magnetic Fields album, and that is maybe the highest praise I can give. I've since seen the video for this with singer Tom York slowly drowning himself in a fishbowl, and yeah, it made me uncomfortable. But it also perfectly suits the mood of this song, especially the relief he clearly expresses when the water drains back down. It is that kind of song, one that communicates despair but also joy. And that's maybe the best kind of song. I'm still waiting for that recording, though. I think I asked for it for Christmas, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I'll get it one day, but until then, I guess I can just listen to Radiohead. There are worse things. And that's it, folks. That's our mixtape for this episode. 10 tracks this time. So we've gone a bit long. My apologies. I'll wrap us up quick here. It's good to finally be in the 90s episode-wise. I strangely still have a bunch of ideas for things to talk about, if you can believe that. If there's stuff you want featured, don't be shy. Ping me in the comments or send me an email. This whole thing works better if it's more of a conversation than a lecture. You're listening to Stronger Than Reason, either on YouTube or on the podcast platform of your choice. The show that's firmly in favor of due process, the separation of powers, and the rule of law. If you think likewise, please contact your representatives to make sure they know it. This isn't the time to be quiet, folks. It's time to channel your inner Joe Strummer, show up, and rattle that cage. As always, I thank you for listening, and until next time, stay strong.